So how many of you are in London proper? I don't know, is there a London proper? I mean, there's so many different boroughs, right? Came from the furthest besides Jerry, since Jerry came from Ireland? Well, you came from Seattle? You don't count either. You only pay the bills. Okay, so obviously, ignore the branding, because this is something that I gave at Experts Live Europe last week. So I think Rob mentioned everything else. Kind of like Rob said, part of, and I think Paul is the same way, Jerry's definitely the same way, is at the end of the day, we're here to help. And that's, I guess we're all kind of unique, maybe quirky, maybe weird, I don't know. You can attribute a lot of things to us. But we love the product, and so we want to help other people use the product. So that's why we're here. So questions, we can go off on tangents. We don't have tons of time, but I'll be here for the rest of the day as well. So if you guys want to go off on any tangents, great, let's do that. For right now, we're going to talk about real-time in ConfigMgr. So how many of you have heard this? Yeah, this has been around for a long time, right? It's the SMS, it's slow-moving software. It's something that's out there, and there's a reason for it. It takes ConfigMgr a while to do certain things. There's processes that have to happen. So when we talk about hardware inventory, let's say we customize hardware inventory. What has to happen? Well, obviously, we have to do something in the console. What happens next? Well, that has to get pushed down to our clients via machine policy. How long does machine policy take? Who's got the shortest machine policy interval in here? Anyone under 30 minutes in their environment? Anyone customize it at all? Let's put it that way. No one? Everyone left? What'd you guys put it to? 30 minutes? Okay. You guys have gone down to 30? What do you? Uh-huh. Okay. So yeah, I've heard that strategy before, so that's a cool strategy. There are folks like Wells Fargo. Everyone somewhat familiar with Wells Fargo. They run about 400,000 systems. They like odd numbers just because it means that it's unique, right? And they can hopefully pinpoint things because it is unique. So theirs is 47 minutes from memory, right? Just something totally weird that's in there. And what that means is it's not going to, in general, I mean, a couple times a day it will, or I don't know, a couple times a week at least. It won't fall on an hour or a half hour, right? It's going to fall somewhere else. But it is always randomized too, so they just pick weird numbers. But ultimately, the real story here is those processes are still there. Hardware inventory is still there. It's not going away. But there's a lot of cool stuff that makes ConfigMgr, it's not SMS anymore, of course, but it makes it more real-time. Really hard to say that it's instant. Even real-time and instant are kind of synonymous. It just depends. But at the end of the day, if we can get stuff back within a couple minutes. Now, when I'm up here talking and we're waiting for things to happen, it's painful sometimes. But it really is when you're at your job and needing to do these things, it comes back in plenty of time so that you don't really get accused of, hey, this thing is slow. So really 3 different types of behavior that we kind of tried to classify things into. The first is the classic. So I talked a little bit hardware inventory. Has anyone done any hardware inventory customizations before? Okay, so y'all kind of know, right? There's other processes in there too as well. You have to run, you have to compile your MOF file, right? So you've got to do that. It has to go down. Like I was talking before, that comes down via policy. Then we have to wait for our next hardware inventory, right? So once again, how many people have customized their hardware inventory interval? So that's one, if you haven't customized, I highly encourage you to customize that one. Don't leave it at 7 days. Maybe on your servers, right? But not on your workstations because it collects a lot of things. And of course, it's the old misnomer. Hardware inventory isn't hardware, right? If you actually look through your inventories, it's mostly software. You've got things like add and remove programs in there. You've got recently used software that's in there. And so that's the kind of stuff that changes, maybe not on a daily basis, but a frequent enough basis on workstations that you do want to keep track of that stuff. On servers, not really. How much stuff changes on a server? Probably not. So that's great that we have our different client settings packages now since 2012, so we can do that. And of course, software distribution, that's a classic behavior as well. So we're talking really about 2 things here, both doing things to a system, right? I want to do X, Y, Z to all of my systems for whatever reason. And I want to collect information. A lot of times those things are tied together. They're tightly tied together. So when we're doing custom hardware inventory, typically we're doing something to the system so that we can collect the information. We're running a script. We're doing something like that. So we have all these different things that have to line up. And that's, once again, taking us back to where our slow-moving software actually is at. So those two things are tightly tied together. Notice I don't have software inventory up here. How many of you actually use software inventory? That's good. It has its uses. So, we bash on software inventory a lot. And there's certain folks who are way over saying, don't ever use software inventory. And I never go that far. But what I do say is be careful with it. It's not really software inventory. So going back to our hardware inventory, right, being the misnomer, because it's got a lot of software in there. Software inventory doesn't really inventory software. It inventories files, right? So if I want to look for a specific PDF file, and I actually had this at a customer a few weeks ago. We were sitting there working, we were implementing ConfigMgr, and they had an old ConfigMgr that had issues, and that's why we weren't using it, but it was still kind of operational. And all of a sudden, the manager came on the line, right? I was actually working remotely. She said, yeah, someone just sent out a PDF to a bunch of people that they shouldn't have sent it out to. We need to go figure out who actually saved the file off. So great, we knew the file name. We just put it in software inventory. We came in the next day because their software inventory was actually running on a daily basis. Boom, we had our answers of who actually had that file. And then those guys had to actually go in and delete that file. I have no idea what was in the file, if it was salary information or something, but it had like top level, hey, people should not have this file. Someone's getting fired over sending this file out, something like that. So it was an enabler, right? Right tool for the right job really is the message there. That takes us to improve time. So this isn't real time by any means, but configuration items, lots of power. And then a little bit state and status messaging. You can do some custom things there. I won't talk too much about that in the interest of time. Now we get to the new stuff, the cool stuff. How many folks are not on current branch at least 1802? You guys aren't? Anyone still on 2012? You guys are. Oh. Any plans to upgrade? Yeah, it's all on you? Okay. So just push the button. It's over Christmas holiday, just push the button. Don't you have any underlings? You can say, oh, it was them. Bring in an intern. Anyway, it's worth getting up to, and that's why some of this stuff is in here, right? Client notification, this actually came with current branch 1511, and has gotten improved every single time. But everything we're going to talk about as far as that is built on top of client notification. Sometimes you'll hear that called fast channel. Scripts are built on top of that as well, so that's really cool. And then the latest thing was CM pivots. So I talked a little bit about this. I won't go into too much detail here, but this is kind of our custom actions, right? We want to do something to all of our machines, XYZ. Doesn't matter really what it is. Normally it's a script. Normally it's going to be PowerShell. Anyone still doing VB script? Nobody? Yeah. Woo. We need Garth here. Yeah, do y'all know who Garth Jones is? He's another MVP. So back in the day, you were there, I'm sure, Rob, maybe 6 years ago, Garth's like, why do we need PowerShell? And it was just like, oh. So he's actually converted, so that's pretty good. Yeah. Yeah, it's been an interesting journey. I mean, VBScript's still there, right? It's still useful. There's still certain little pockets of things that we have to use VBScript for, but that's kind of going away. PowerShell makes life a lot easier. So, but basically, that's what we want to do, right? We want to do custom action XYZ. It's usually software distribution. We're waiting for our hardware inventory cycle. We're waiting for our machine policy interval. We're waiting for all of those things, right? Hopefully, everyone's relatively familiar with that. Same with data collection. You know, if we're going to do data collection, we're modifying our MOF files. The SMS def MOF, of course, doesn't explicitly exist anymore, but that's actually defining, you know, the custom inventory and ConfigMgr itself. And we're still waiting for those kinds of things to happen. We're, of course, also having to create a script. So that's always fun. How many of you would consider yourselves competent from writing a script from scratch? Yeah, see, and that's generally the census. Now, I would say everyone else, let's ask this one. How many of you are competent in taking someone else's script and modifying it to do what you need it to do? Mostly everyone else, right? And that's generally where most IT admins are at. And that's great, right? There's tons of stuff out there. There's lots of folks that put their scripts out there. So that's a great place to start. One of the things that they are adding, this is in the latest TPs, they're actually adding a script repository so that you can contribute and or download things from the community. This is all integrated with GitHub from memory. I don't remember what the back end was of it. But it allows you exactly, like I said, it's a repository. So you don't have to necessarily go hunting for other scripts. There's going to be a rating system. There's going to be some curation to make sure that they're not dangerous, because at the end of the day, our scripts are going to run as local system, right? Everything ConfigMgr does runs as local system. So we don't want to just run any random script. We could definitely destroy our environment. Anyone ever deploy a task sequence to all systems as required? In my lab, I have all the time. But so we have all these things, and this continues to reinforce, hey, these are slow-moving software pieces. So just some quick comparisons, right? This isn't going away. This still has some huge benefits. One of the biggest things that comes out here is offline systems. When we talk about real time, and we'll get to the real time for sure, but what happens with offline systems when we're trying to do things real time? You don't touch them, right? For whatever reason, there's that system in a drawer. There's that person that's on maternity leave or paternity leave. They're on vacation in Europe or wherever they're actually at. You can't collect anything real time from there. So does that skew your compliance numbers or anything that you're actually doing? Of course it does. Is it a huge percentage? I don't know. It depends upon your workforce. Totally depends upon your workforce. How many of you have 100% compliance for anything? How many of your bosses expect 100% compliance? Exactly. So your numbers are going to get skewed no matter what. So, but it's these one-time tasks, this instant gratification type stuff. You can do it, but it's not the funnest all the time, right? You're putting a lot of effort into something and not getting a lot of return on that. So this is in the deck that I will send to Rob and the guys, and they can get it out to everybody. So I won't talk about any of the log files, but they're there for completeness. So we'll talk client messaging. Let me get rid of, real briefly. So this isn't really classic. These have been there since 2007. This is just two different ways of getting information back from the client. So the top is the status messages. This is actually a more classic way of doing it, because 2007 is when I introduced the state messages. And we can actually create custom status messages. So there are ways of doing some custom things around this. This is just how a client lets the site know, hey, this is something going on with me. This isn't necessarily returning explicit data, but we can do some customization around this. So the real key here, though, is that state messages is what's used by client notification. So we got to keep that in mind. We have this queue for 15 minutes. The product team's actually working on reducing this. There is a thing called high priority state messages that don't wait for 15 minutes, but even those aren't fast enough. So what we see today as far as the real time, we haven't gotten to that yet, of course, but what we see today as real time is actually going to hopefully get even faster in the future as well as the team works on those things. Configuration items. How many of you use configuration items? They're becoming more and more popular. If I would have asked that question clearly in the 2007 timeframe, most people had no clue what they were called. And that, for 2007, they were called Desired Configuration Management, DCM. I don't even remember what it stood for, DCM. And so they just renamed it. I don't know, the marketing guys love renaming things, right? Paul knows that one real well. So that's really it. But configuration items are another, they're kind of an intermediate place. There's one downside to configuration items is there's a randomization time. So it's really hard to control exactly when a CI runs. So if you need something to run exactly at 1 a.m., you're probably not going to get it done with the CI. However, if you need to have something run on a continuous basis, even a one-time basis, CIs are great at running scripts, collecting information. So let's go into CIs real quick. Make sure my mouse is actually working. It is. And let's go over to my lab. Here we go, my wonderful portable lab. So CIs exist here under Assets and Compliance. Let me make sure Zoom It is running. I think it is. Oh, I got a weird geometry. There's Zoom It. I think he's running, though. Yes, he's running. OK. So we go into CIs here. We go under Compliance Settings. And we go under configuration items. I've got a ton of CIs here. A lot of these are CT Global ones. So CT Global actually has created a bunch. I didn't mention that at the beginning. My full-time employer is CT Global. So now you know. And we love helping people as well. So that's what a lot of these are. The ones that I like to show here, though, some really simple ones. So we start off with WSUS. How many of you have had issues with WSUS? If you're not raising your hand, you're either not allowed to raise your hand for this one, or you're just fooling yourself because WSUS is WSUS. Do you have a word for WSUS, Rob? I love WSUS. So We can combine lots of CIs into one CI, or into one baseline, or even in one CI, we can put a lot of different settings. In this case, you can see this is, like I said, a WSUS1. So if we don't have our WSUS server set properly on our clients, software updates doesn't work at all, and then we get zero compliance, right? So this is something that I have implemented at a handful of customers because they've had this. They've had different pockets of IT folks. They've had their shadow IT that has set things in group policy, because they actually have group policy, to go to a different WSUS server or a non-existent WSUS server, and of course that will shut down software updates. So in this case, and this is typically the challenge with a lot of this, is figuring out where these settings are, right? This isn't group policy. This is like it, love it, whatever, leave it, group policy. One of the things that group policy's been great at, and this kind of is a downfall because there's so many of them, but it's been great at is actually having a description, right? If I wanted to go find screensaver setting in group policy, it might take me a while, but I'm going to find a setting that says set the screensaver. It's not going to give me a registry value, right? So this is usually the most difficult thing, is translating that English. In our case, English, and of course in other languages, is probably even more difficult because a lot of the words don't translate exactly. But in English, at least we can directly go and look those things up within a group policy, the group policy editor somewhere, instead of hunting through the registry. In this case, most of these things are pretty widely known, right? You can go search on the web, hey, where's the screensaver? Or in this case, the WSUS server setting. We can go figure those things out, and we can put those into the CIs. So that's what this one's doing. There's lots of other possibilities here, though, and we don't want to limit ourselves to just registry values, although the vast majority of things that we want to set in an environment are definitely registry values. But we can do lots of other things, and let me zoom in live here. So we have our registry values, and we have our registry key. We can check for its existence. The other things that are in here, you can see there's a bunch of them. If I don't move around too much, go back over. There we go. My mouse is going to slide on me, isn't it? Let me pick it up. There we go. So we have script. That's the one that's actually highlighted. That's going to be one of the more powerful ones in a lot of the things that get used there. So there's certain things, even in the registry, that are difficult to do with directly querying the registry. So we end up dropping down to PowerShell. There was a bug for a while. Well, this is still kind of there, right? If you're on a 64-bit system and you want it to create a registry value, we haven't talked about that explicitly, but this is one of those scenarios, it'll create a keyword. How many of you have ever seen a keyword in the registry that actually worked? You did? Okay, you've seen it, but it's just a value. So most of the times it's going to be fine, but that's not what you see. Most of them are going to be D words, right? They're not keywords. And that's all about the 64-bit versus the 32-bit architecture. So for that, we often have to fall back to the script, or 32-bit versus 64-bit, right? Sometimes our applications do funky things. Everyone have to deal with WOW6432 node? Everyone familiar with those? If you're not, I guess it's getting more and more. Well, everyone's going to 64-bit, right? People are actually dropping 32-bit. How many of you are actually running 32-bit OSs still? A couple of y'all? Yeah, and that's been the trend. It's been a pretty quick change over the past three years or so. So you're going to have to get used to those things. Other things we can do with the WQL query. That's pretty powerful as well, right? Querying anything in WMI. ConfigMgr itself is that WMI collector, but for those one-time tasks, or that, hey, let's not wait for hardware inventory to actually pull that back. The WQL is great here. And then we have the file system, right? We want to look for a file. So going back to my example before, we could do that as well, right? We want to look for XYZ PDF file on a file system. Then we can use the file system option here as well and go look for that and have reporting. So once we do that, let me get out of the live Zoom because it's difficult to navigate. We can actually check. Let's go back to my other rule because it's a little bit easier to see there. We can check the values. So in the other rule, or that setting, it actually said, hey, where am I looking? Well, here's what it actually says. One of, and this is the value I'm comparing against. In this case, my operator is the one of, and I always get this wrong. Nope, that's not that one. That's not that one. Where's my arrow? That's not it. I never remember where the arrow's at. This one right here, this one of, I'll do the box. I can do the box, I never remember the arrow. So I can do the one of right there, right? And there's different operators that are in here. So in some environments, you're going to have multiple subs. In most environments, you're probably only going to have one. So the one of operator is probably not the best one to use. You can use another operator like equals. Now, notice that some of my options changed here, and I alluded to this fact before, is I can actually do remediation now. So, compliance edits or compliance items at their heart are all about doing that compliance check, right? Making sure, giving us a thumbs up or a thumbs down. But maybe we actually want to change the value. Let's make sure we change the value. So what does that start sounding like? Group policies. We have this nice little overlap with group policy. We could potentially do just about everything the group policy can do through configuration items. So there's a huge benefit in that if you're doing things across the internet, right? If I have clients on the internet, they're most likely not logging into my domain. So is my group policy ever going to get applied to them? Maybe if they VPN in, right? And maybe if they stay in VPN'd in long enough. But if I'm managing using CMG, which there's a couple sessions on here today, or just plain IBCM, then I can use this, and now I can actually set any registry value I want. We still have our challenge of doing our translation of XYZ setting from English to wherever it is in the registry or wherever file system. But we can actually make that change. So it's pretty cool. It's more than compliance is really what it comes down to. We can also do data collection. Data collection's a little bit trickier. It wasn't explicitly designed for that. But basically, and let me flip it back to my one of. I'm sure my value's still in here. One of. No, it's not. Whatever. You guys saw that value that was in there. Or really, if I put any value, even if I put it as equals, and I put my value in here, whatever, HTTP, whatever, XYZ. So if I've got that value in there, if a client comes back as not compliant, it'll actually send the value back that it has. So you can actually report on that as well. So traditionally, it's definitely been a thumbs up, thumbs down, but it will send that value back. And so now we can report on, hey, what value people actually have out there. Maybe in this case, you probably don't explicitly want to know, but there's lots of scenarios where you're going to want to collect that data as well. And of course, not wait for hardware inventory, not wait for that slow moving piece to actually happen. One other cool thing that comes with compliance settings, though, is maybe, let's say we're checking antivirus. This is kind of the easy, low-hanging example, I think. If we're checking antivirus, how are we going to remediate antivirus, right? If our definitions are out of date, or more importantly, maybe our antivirus or any security tool is just flat out not installed. Well, we obviously have to install it, which means we're using either a package or application. So if we go down here, unfortunately, I've got to scroll down a little bit to see my tabs. Where are you? Oh, it's on the baseline because we're deploying the baseline itself. I think this baseline's deployed. So if I right-click, they added this feature a while back. Most people don't know it's there. But if I actually right-click on a baseline deployment, notice there's that create new collections down there. And then we have this compliant, oops, go over, there we go. We have this compliant error, non-compliant unknown. If I do that, it'll actually create a collection for me. It's a dynamic collection. It doesn't have static membership. So there's no direct rules for this. It's actually a query-based rule. And so every system that comes back, of course, it has to be deployed to that system, but every system that comes back is one of those, so I'd create a collection for compliant systems. Now, in my example's case, I'd create one for non-compliant systems. And now I have a collection that I can target my software to, my antivirus, right, if I'm using a third-party antivirus. So pretty simple to do. It's just a query rule behind the scenes. You can actually copy the query if you want, if you don't want to have it automatically created, and you can manipulate it however you want to manipulate it. So pretty cool to do. Yeah, please.
You use those features to build out your queries. Have a look at the, what's it called? CE viewer?
Yep.
Check that out. Have a look at the runtime on those queries. You might think, oh, there's not these out behind you. And you find out that one's taking 2 minutes, one's taking 1 minute, sometimes 10 minutes, depending on how expensive that query is, how much data is touching. So even though that's a really quick pathway to get things into the console, into the collections you can target it, just be careful what you're doing. Don't overuse them. Keep an eye on that CE viewer on what the runtimes are. Otherwise, the collection evaluator will be running for an hour before it gets back to the start again.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to put these as incremental. Then you could potentially kill yourself quite easily. So CIs were there, and they've been there for a while, and this is what folks have been using for that kind of real-timedness. And they've done a pretty good job of that real-timedness. So let's go back real quick to the slides, just some more talk about the configuration items. We can do VB script or PowerShell like I talked about. There is a 60-second script timeout. That is configurable. I don't remember how offhand. I think you go into WMI somewhere and change that. It usually doesn't come into play, and honestly, if you're running a script that's going to take more than 60 seconds on any of your systems, either your systems are way too slow, or your script is probably way too complicated. So Recurring tasks, this is great because this is a deployment, right? And we get all of our deployment, not our application deployment, but our package deployment. We get all of those recurring intervals that, every Tuesday, every second Tuesday, those kinds of things if we want to run those kinds of things. So this is great for those pre-checks, right? If we want to do pre-checks on our in that case, WSUS, right? Because every month, everyone on a monthly patching schedule in general, right? Every month, that same thing's going to happen, and we're going to have a bunch of clients that are probably broken for whatever reason because users touch them, right? If users touch them, they break. That's just kind of how it goes. They do send the results every 15 minutes, and one thing I don't have up here is what I mentioned before as well. There's a 2-hour randomization, up to 2-hour randomization that happens from the actual deadline time that you put on a deployment. So that can play havoc with things. If you're expecting things to happen in a specific time or you're testing things, you might sit there and wait for a little while. The other kind of this can be a double-edged sword. There's no content, right? It's all part of policy. So this is all machine policy at this point in time. So if we needed to reference a file somewhere else, there's no built-in way for you to do that. It can be done, but if that's truly what you're going to do, configuration items may not be the best tool for that. But you can put something out on a file share, but if you have a wide area network, right, or if you have a large distributed network, where's that file share going to be? I don't know, right? Do you really want things to go across the WAN to grab a file? If it's a small file, maybe not such a big deal, but then again, you may have firewalls in place. There may be other mitigating factors, so you really have to think about that. If you need some external content, CIs are probably not the best way to go. Okay, we looked at that. More log files. Everyone love log files? How many of you are using Intune? Do you miss log files? That was feedback for you, Paul. I think you've heard that one a million times before, though, haven't you? Yeah. Yep. Okay, client notification, big green button. So you'll see this a lot, the BGB. This was the code name. I don't know why they sometimes use the code name and sometimes don't, but this was kind of one of the cool code names they came up with. And so a lot of the log files, a lot of the underlying components are still called BGB, and so that's exactly where that comes from, right? I want to hit the big green button, I just want things to happen. So this is starting to get into that real-time stuff. The way they accomplish this is they actually build a channel from the client to the management point. This channel, then there's a keep alive that gets sent down every 15 minutes to allow that to be open. So the huge advantage here is that we don't have to worry about firewalls, right? We may have a host-based firewall on our client, but in general, unless you've locked down your host-based firewalls, they allow outbound traffic, so we don't have to do anything special there. Of course, our management point has to accept the traffic, but if our management point doesn't accept traffic, we've got bigger issues. So it sets up that channel. We also don't need DNS resolution to our clients, right? Because the client is the one that's actually initiating this channel. And we don't need permissions. Me as the administrator, I don't need local admin permissions on that client, right? So this channel is getting initiated. This is all the normal things the client agent normally does and the advantages we have of the client agent always initiating traffic and communication. Now, it is ultimately a two-way channel, right? And that's why we send that 15-minute keep alive down from the client to the management point. And that allows any intermediate firewalls to keep that pipe open as well. It's just the way stateful packet message firewalls work, is they will keep that persistent channel open. Now, when I do something in the console, it might take a little while. But for me in an enterprise, if I can get my data back pretty much real time, or within a couple minutes, granted 6 clients, but once again, this does extrapolate. This comes out to just a couple of minutes, even across thousands upon thousands of clients. That's good enough for me, but they are continuing to iterate and continuing to try to make this faster. And of course, like I said, a few times, adding entities in here. So pretty cool, works really well. Now you can create a collection up here as well, and there is an export results up here as well. So this exports it, notice there's a CSV or to clipboard, so you can actually dump it straight to a file. Or the collection, now this isn't like the CI collection, this actually creates a collection with direct membership rules in it. So you're not gonna have a query rule in there. I think those kinds of things are coming. I've talked to Miriam a little bit about that stuff, and I know those are things they're wanting to try to get to because there is some limited there. At the same time, these queries can be expensive, so they're starting to, kind of like what Rob was talking about before. Anytime you build a collection with a query behind it, you want to go into CE Viewer. Whether it was you or someone else that did that, you want to monitor those kinds of things because otherwise you're going to crater your SQL Server, no problem. Okay. Let's go back and finish up the last couple of slides. So just kind of some comparison. You guys can look through this later on. I think there's one other small asterisk in here. Oh, the interesting thing, there's the can be scheduled. So the client notification script, CM pivot, right? That's down here, the no. There's no PowerShell support, which is kind of a big irony in all of this, right? You're running PowerShell scripts, but there's no PowerShell support today to run scripts. Once we actually get to that, or once they actually introduce that, then we'll actually be able to start scheduling some of this stuff. And that'll be kind of cool. That opens up a whole new layer of automation, all of this kind of stuff. The gotchas around this, script signing. I harped on this at Experts Live for sure. If you guys don't have a code signing cert in your environment, get one and sign everything. Right? Sign your developer's applications, sign all of your scripts, do everything. This goes into a lot of the security mechanisms behind the scene. If you've heard about the ISG, the intelligent security graph that Microsoft is running behind the scenes, signing scripts is a big piece of that, or can be a big piece of that. Sign everything. It's great for security. It's great for integrity of all the things going on in your environment. They don't cost much. You can get one for about $300 a year. Hopefully your organization can afford that. PowerShell execution policy. You don't have to worry about that, right? We've all run into that. Hey, you can't run this script locally unless you go set the PowerShell execution policy. It's just an annoyance for most folks, and they end up going and turning it off. You don't have to worry about that if you sign your scripts, right? Because that's the whole intent of this. We want to make sure people are doing that, so there's really a trail back to who actually wrote that script. PowerShell 5.0 has a constrained language thing. Not such a big deal, but just something to be aware of as you're rolling out 5.0. Your version, there was a little footnote before, you have to be at least at 3.0. So if you still have any Windows 7 clients, anyone still have a large majority of Windows 7 clients? Well, that's different. Experts Live, I don't know, maybe all the folks they were all Scandinavian or something, even though we were in Prague. There weren't very many people that had Windows 7. But I've been at a couple customers recently that had still a lot of Windows 7 and never actually rolled out PowerShell, or had PowerShell 1.0, right? So if you're not up to 3.0, you're not going to be able to use, you're going to be able to use client notification, you're just not going to be able to use the scripts. And then offline clients, right? There's nothing we can do about an offline client. So which one to use? It's up to you, right tool for the right job. I said that earlier, right? Software inventory has its places. So does CI, so does scripts. There's a lot of overlap in here, though. So sometimes it's just more what you're comfortable with. At the end of the day, if you're doing something that's supported, something that works, and something that meets your requirements, great, go ahead and go for it, right? There's nothing wrong with doing that. Sometimes there might be better ways to do things, but as long as your boss is happy, then you should be happy at the same time. So there's not always a wrong choice. There can be a wrong choice for sure, but there's not always a best choice either. So just learn each tool set and figure out which is best for you. I didn't talk extensively about CIs, but Sherry has a ton of stuff on CIs, so those top two blog posts. And the one I talked a little bit about was getting information back from CIs. That's that top blog post there as well. So Sherry works for Wells Fargo, so she does this extensively, right? 400,000 clients, and she does this. Gathering that kind of information. So more or less, whatever Sherry does is probably okay for you. There's some other ones in here, SCCM These are some older compliance items that are out there that you can just copy and paste. They're good examples of some pretty simple PowerShell scripts that you can use. So once again, going back to the sharing. There's one for me for certificate deployment. I have one on there from Kim Opelfence. Just about the network access account, kind of an aside. I think I put that in there because when I originally presented this material, I was with Kim. The network access account is a potential security hole, so that's the only reason I put that one in there. So go read that. If you don't know about that one, go read that one for sure. And I think that's it. Oh, those are the sponsors for Experts Live, not here, so go away. Although Adaptiva's on there, so that's okay. So yeah, like I said, I'll be around for the rest of the day. I guess in the interest of time, I will get out of in front of you guys. But I'll be around, and come definitely ask me questions. Thanks for your time.